On this Friday night, an overwhelmed police force. An ex-Ottawa police chief testifies about his handling of the so-called Freedom Convoy.
It was crushing to the members' morale.
The emotional testimony in defense of his actions. Inching towards sovereignty.
We couldn't sit back and keep waiting for the government.
What one First Nations push for representation could mean for communities across the country. Plus, billionaire takeover. The changes already rippling through Twitter as the world's richest man takes the reins. And where is Nancy? The disturbing detail emerging of a violent break-in at the home of one of America's top politicians.
Global National with Farah Nasser. Reporting tonight, Neetu Garsha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The former chief of the Ottawa Police Service was in the hot seat today at the inquiry into the government's use of the Emergencies Act to break up the so-called Freedom Convoy protests in downtown Ottawa in February. Peter Sloly, who resigned just one day after the act was invoked, got emotional as he testified the protest was overwhelming his force while his officers were doing their best to peacefully end the occupation.
They were doing their very best under inhuman circumstances, like the city was, like the community was. It was too cold and it was too much.
Sloly testified that even with the benefit of hindsight, nothing in intelligence reports before the convoy's arrival indicated to him they would stay past the weekend. Sloly also testified he believes the demonstration became unlawful on the first Saturday morning of the occupation when he saw protesters digging in and fortifying their positions. Eric Sorensen has the details.
Even as convoy protesters began arriving that Thursday and Friday in January, Ottawa's then chief of police believed they would leave soon enough. OPP intelligence had warned the protesters could stay, and by Saturday some were clearly setting up for a longer occupation. But former Chief Peter Sloly said the briefings he had did not change his view.
This was going to be a Thursday, Friday, mainly Saturday, Sunday event with the potential for a smaller group to remain behind.
By Monday, it was clear a large number of demonstrators had no intention of going anywhere. The Ottawa police said Sloly were overwhelmed, and as the police largely stood by, making no arrests, they were roundly criticized.
The level of disinformation and misinformation was off the charts. It was crushing to the members' morale.
By midweek, frustration was mounting as life in downtown Ottawa was being disrupted with no end in sight. And at that moment, Sloly said this.
There is likely no policing solution to this.
He explained today that he meant not just a policing solution, but the need for governments and other agencies to work together. But rumblings were beginning about Sloly's leadership. From the RCMP commissioner, notes at the inquiry showed Brenda Lucki believed the federal government was losing confidence in Sloly. And one of Sloly's own deputies suggested Ottawa police didn't appreciate what was brewing.
I think there was definitely a failure to appreciate.
One lesson learned is the need for greater integration of intelligence across all agencies to be better prepared.
In policing, you plan for the worst and hope for the best. And I think probably what backfired is it happened in reverse. Bad things happened and not good things.
There was internal confusion within the Ottawa Police and among the different forces. On February 14th, the federal government invoked the Emergencies Act, giving police greater powers to clear the protesters. But it had all taken a toll on Sloly, who stepped down one day later.
It was clear to me that the trust factor in Ottawa Police Service was still headed in the wrong direction. And the only person that could take that pressure off the Ottawa Police Service was me, and I made that decision to resign from office.
The big question at the inquiry remains, was the Emergencies Act necessary? The Commission will consider what factors prompted that decision and whether one of them was an overwhelmed Ottawa Police Department. Eric Sorensen, Global News.
The pandemic pushed people online more than ever before, and as a result, the number of sophisticated cyber threats is at an all-time high. In its newly released assessment, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity is outlining the top online dangers. They involve some large targets, but as Dan Spector reports, the average person could also get hit at any time.
So the report is not meant to be anything scary.
But the online world seems to be getting spookier by the day. In this new report, intelligence officials say the biggest issue facing Canadians connected to the internet in 2022 is the endless amount of scammers trying to steal your money. Watching where you click has never been so important.
It's becoming more and more sophisticated, and often it is through a phishing email.
But there are much larger targets than your bank account. The Cybersecurity Centre says critical infrastructure faces growing risks. Take the example of Toronto's Humber River Hospital being paralyzed last year by a ransomware attack. Essential health services halted.
My advice to the Prime Minister would really be around critical infrastructure, because I do think that's where we're seeing a lot of legislative movement right now.
Then there are the growing activities of foreign actors. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, among the nations already running state-sponsored cyber operations against Canada. This expert feels the new assessment underplays the Russian threat.
So I think that the CSC report, while it hits the mark on several issues, it really misses the mark quite extraordinarily on their assessment of Russian disinformation and influence operations targeting Canada.
Misinformation and disinformation hitting our eyes daily, spreading falsehoods about the war in Ukraine or events unfolding here at home.
We know that Russian state media was legitimizing fringe actors within the Freedom Convoy protest movements.
The government points to ongoing efforts to bolster cybersecurity, including nearly $1 billion in the most recent budget.
What is the role of government? Should we have online hate legislation or something else? Should we be empowering the RCMP to take action, or should we be imposing heightened requirements on social media platforms themselves?
Parsons only hopes that as the government widens the online fight, it does so legally and without infringing on your privacy. Dan Spector, Global News.
The deal is done. Elon Musk has purchased Twitter and immediately made his mark by firing senior executives. He calls himself a free speech absolutist, and there's speculation Musk may allow banned users, including Donald Trump, back on the social media platform. But as Redmond Shannon reports, Musk is also trying to reassure mainstream investors.
It can now really sink in. The world's richest person, Elon Musk, owns Twitter. He bought it for a staggering $44 billion despite his efforts in the spring to get out of the deal.
Musk is overpaying by double. That's why it's going to go down as a head scratcher, but it's a deal he couldn't get out of.
Musk will want to claw back some of that cash. The Canadian citizen says he wants to make it an everything app, perhaps with a subscription fee, shopping and payments. But he also wants to see it let loose as a platform for free speech, tweeting, "The bird is freed."
Which is making advertisers nervous as well. It's yet to be seen how he's going to square that circle.
Musk says he will be forming a content moderation council to decide on reinstating banned users. One of the executives just fired by Musk was reportedly central to banning Donald Trump. On Trump's own social media platform, the former US president welcomed Musk's deal, saying he is happy that Twitter is now in sane hands and will no longer be run by radical left lunatics. Musk says he wants to make Twitter a town square for the left and the right, but not a free-for-all hellscape. Some media analysts say it's never ideal when the super rich control communication.
The free speech of a billionaire's friends remains paramount, while the freedom of expression and speech of those who are questioning or critical is very, very liable to be curtailed.
Musk has been criticised for his views on issues like Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the COVID-19 pandemic. Now that Twitter is his nest, the billionaire will be able to chirp louder than ever. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
The House of Commons is now recognizing the residential school system as an act of genocide after a Winnipeg MP's motion passed with unanimous consent on the third try.
We need to do better. We need to find a way forward that honors the truth about what happened in this country, especially in light of Pope Francis's acknowledgement that what took place in residential schools was, in fact, genocide.
After question period, Leah Gazan said she was grateful parliamentarians are now recognizing the truth of Canada's history. This type of motion doesn't always reflect official government policies, but instead reflects the will of the House of Commons. They pass if no other MPs voice opposition when the motion is moved. Residential school survivors and their families looking for help can call the Residential School Survivors and Family Crisis Line at 1-800-721-0066. A First Nation in Alberta is taking what it believes will be a precedent-setting step towards Indigenous sovereignty and reconciliation within Canada's justice system. Siksika Nation has hired a law firm to create the country's first ever First Nation bylaw prosecutor's office. As Heather Yerix-West reports, lawyers will represent the nation instead of the Crown in court in order to enforce local band council resolutions and bylaws.
When we talk about our justice,
Lindsay Mincher and Andrew Coleman are not members of the Siksika First Nation. The Calgary lawyers are both non-Indigenous. But the two will soon be spending a lot of time in this community as newly appointed prosecutors, not for the Crown, but for the Siksika First Nation itself.
We're going to start building an office that allows them to prosecute their own bylaws, because historically those have fallen by the way. They've not been prosecuted by the federal government, they're not being prosecuted by the provincial government.
Solemnly and sincerely
It sounds like a novel concept because in Canada it is. Under the Indian Act, First Nation councils can create band resolutions or bylaws to govern their communities. But these rules are often not enforced by police agencies or the courts.
If you have bylaws that you can enforce and put onto the books, then why isn't there someone to prosecute that? That's a huge piece of the puzzle that is just not there. How many of our bylaws are being...
Siksika councillor Samuel Crowfoot is a lawyer and served as the chief judge for a tribal court in New Mexico. He believes First Nations across Canada can learn a lot from how things have been done in Indigenous communities south of the border. The Siksika First Nation is not the only Indigenous community seeking this change. In the days following the mass killings on the James Smith Cree Nation in Saskatchewan, community leaders there made a similar call.
Our bylaws, our band council resolutions, they have to be enforced by the RCMP. They have to be.
we couldn't sit back and keep waiting for the government. You know, we had to take steps in our own hands.
The Siksika First Nation and their new prosecutors know there will be challenges ahead as they forge an uncharted path with Canada's courts. But the team says it's ready to get to work, not only for the community here, but has set important legal precedents for other Indigenous communities across the country.
Thank you.
Heather Yerix-West, Global News, Calgary.
We were giving terms of this ain't the right time. When will be the right time for Indigenous peoples to be at the forefront in this so-called spirit of reconciliation?
The leaders behind what would have been the first Olympics led by an Indigenous group reacting after the bid for Vancouver 2030 came to a grinding halt. The provincial government has chosen not to support it, citing cost. Those involved with the bid say they're disheartened by the lack of consultation. A violent break-in at Nancy Pelosi's house. Coming up, the investigation into the attack that sent Pelosi's husband to hospital. A man in San Francisco is facing charges in connection with a violent assault on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband. Paul Pelosi was attacked early this morning in his California home. His wife was in Washington at the time. Police are saying little about the motive, but some details are emerging about the suspect. Jackson Prosco is following the latest developments. Jackson, what more can you tell us?
Well, Neithu, this happened just after 2 a.m. local time in San Francisco. Video clearly shows the smashed windows at the back door of the Pelosi home. And police say when they arrived, they saw the suspect and Paul Pelosi struggling over a hammer. They say Mr. Pelosi was then violently struck before the suspect was tackled by officers. Here's perhaps the truly concerning part. Reports suggest that after the suspect entered the home, he began asking, "Where's Nancy? Where's Nancy?" And that's the exact same kind of language language used by some of the January 6th rioters who stormed Pelosi's office inside the Capitol building. Now, the suspect is identified as 42-year-old David DePape. The charges he faces include attempted homicide. His online posts are filled with right-wing conspiracy theories about the 2020 election, about January 6th, and about COVID vaccines. We've seen politicians from both parties rush to condemn this attack, but make no mistake, there is increasing fear about political violence in this country, especially with midterm elections just 11 days away and with the rhetoric still so heated. Polls suggest a majority of both Democrats and Republicans now view the other party as an existential threat to the nation. As for Paul Pelosi, he's in hospital, expected to survive, though his injuries are considered serious. In a statement tonight, Speaker Pelosi is asking for privacy for her family. Neithu?
All right, Jackson Prosco in Washington. Thanks, Jackson. The music world is saying farewell to one of rock and roll's biggest trailblazers. Jerry Lee Lewis has passed away. Known by his nickname, The Killer, Lewis was one of the first rock and roll stars performing alongside icons like Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash. He was a major influence on generations of musicians, but he also gained notoriety for his struggles with substance abuse and a slew of scandals that included a secret marriage to a 13-year-old girl. Lewis was 87. Pregnancy loss support ahead, confusion and concerns around access to leave across Canada. A topic that's traditionally only been talked about in private is starting to have more public attention, recognition, and less stigma. As we told you last week, bereavement and support provisions for those who've suffered pregnancy loss are slowly improving, at least in some provinces. But advocates say there's still a lack of awareness and a lot of confusion. Here's Ross Lord.
Pregnancy loss is still largely a taboo subject. No one knows better than Nova Scotia researcher Stephanie Gilbert. She lost a baby at 37 weeks.
There's very little support out there, and there's very little access to the information, especially when it comes to loss leave options. So there's a lot of confusion, especially right after your loss around like, what time can I have? What am I eligible for? And so on. I was able to take 15 weeks off and really felt ready to go back to work after the 15 weeks. And I'm learning now through conversations with many other pregnancy loss sufferers is that I seem to be an exception.
Gilbert has interviewed dozens of other women who've experienced pregnancy loss among the 3,000 fetal deaths that happen every year in Canada.
And very few of those people were even aware that there are paid leave options for them.
Most resort to taking sick time, vacation days, or rushing back to their jobs. There's a hodgepodge of bereavement leave policies across Canada. Many provinces or territories using a broad definition, including time off for the loss of most family members or an immediate family member, but they don't specify options for pregnancy loss. PEI does include pregnancy loss, along with Nova Scotia's newly changed legislation. It's named Ruby's Law, after this Liberal MLA's granddaughter, born still at 32 weeks.
They will know what each member here did, and it will help them heal, just like it helped my family heal.
Many provinces do offer pregnancy leave separately, either with or without pay, but for those with enough hours of work to qualify, federal maternity benefits are sometimes a better option.
And that's paid time. You get up to a maximum of 55% of your salary through that program for 15 weeks. And so that's quite generous. For people who don't have a loss after 20 weeks, so that maybe it's considered a miscarriage if it's prior to 20 weeks, then you can qualify for sickness leave benefits through employment insurance.
With growing awareness, Gilbert and other advocates hope this scattershot system of leave provisions will soon be made more accessible and less confusing for those who've endured a trauma so difficult to discuss. Ross Lord, Global News, Halifax.
Cashless Canada next, why many of us are digitizing our wallets. When you're purchasing an item, how do you pay? If cash wasn't your first answer, you're not alone. In fact, Canada is one of the leading countries in the world going cashless due to the convenience and how much faster it is. For the new reality, senior business reporter Anne Gaviola looked into the trend. Anne.
As a form of payment, Canadians are moving away from cash, opting for debit, credit, mobile wallets, and smartwatches. Speed, ease, and convenience are driving Canadians to choose plastic over cash. But that's not all. Canadians also have a history with technology that's helped push contactless and digital forms of payment to the forefront, including the early adoption of automated banking machines and the interbank transaction system, Interac. Experts say those digital advancements have greatly influenced our behavior.
I don't know if we often pause to think how strange it is to just pause in the middle of the street, pay a bill on your phone while monitoring your investments. These are both characteristically modern experiences, but also very peculiar.
So how quickly are we moving away from cash? A global payments report is projecting that by 2025, cash will only make up 3% of all point-of-sale transactions in the country. So even though paying with cash is on a steady decline across the country, Canadians still find cash comforting. For example, during times of crisis, there tends to be an uptick in cash withdrawals because it offers people a sense of comfort and security. And during the pandemic, an RBC report has shown a spike in people withdrawing cash and using it as a vehicle to stash. And some businesses are also still dedicated to cash only and its benefits.
When people want to use a card to pay with like one of those Sirius or Debit or Square systems, that costs the business money. So every time you go to a restaurant and pay with your card, that business is losing money.
So cash hasn't lost its appeal, but its role in an increasingly cashless culture is unknown.
And you can catch Anne's full story on the new reality tomorrow at 7 p.m. right here on Global. And that is Global National for this Friday. We leave you tonight with an art world blunder that went unnoticed for nearly 80 years. For 77 years, Piet Mondrian's New York City One has been hanging upside down in a German gallery. The error was realized after pictures were found from 1944. But it's going to stay upside down, at least for now. There are concerns that if it's flipped, it could fall apart. I'm Neetu Garsha. Thanks for watching. Farah Nasser will be here tomorrow.